There's a reason why Israel does not put even one boot of a soldier into the Gaza Strip. I think anybody who has any knowledge of military knows it would be suicidal for Israel.
What follows is the second of two interviews with Miko Peled. If you watched the first one, you already know that Mikko comes from a prominent Zionist family because his grandfather was a co-signatory of Israel's Declaration of Independence and his father was a general in the 1967 war. It's exactly this background and upbringing that gives Mikko such a unique perspective when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. That's the reason he can speak about it in a manner very few men can. If you haven't seen it yet, have a look at the preface we made for this little series. It's called The Tears of Disappearing Palestine. It's not meant to change anyone's mind, which is hardly possible anyway on such a polarizing topic, but it gives you a perspective to Mikko's line of arguments. Just imagine, someone you love is tragically killed by a suicide bomber, but instead of hate, you seek understanding how different the world could be. The links for both the preface and the interview are in the description below, and if the topic interests you, I highly recommend to watch both. Miko Peled, the second time around. Thank you for following up with our discussion. How is it going?
Sure, second try. It's going well, thank you. Much better place to sit and talk.
A bit more silent, that's true. Okay. Now, on the last call, we covered quite a range of topics. Yeah. So this time I would like to zero in on a couple of, actually only on 3 key items, right? And I thought we start with the missing constitution, right? Can you tell us about something? So why, in the first place, does Israel not have a constitution, and what are the consequences? Because there are really tangible consequences related to the political crisis that we're seeing.
That's a very good question. Israel can't have a constitution because it would have to define itself, and it cannot define itself. So Israel claims to be a Jewish state. But what is Jewish? What is a Jewish state? There's never been a Jewish state. So a Jewish state would have to mean something like a completely religious state. Now, what is Jewish is defined very well by the Torah, by the Jewish scriptures. But if we were going to go by that, then we would all be ultra-Orthodox Jews. Then you have the more kind of more liberal interpretation of what it means to be a Jew. We have the conservative Jewish movement. We have the Reform Jewish movement. We have all these other, offshoots of that. So what is Jewish? And how could it be a Jewish state? It's in an Arab country. It has a very large Arab population that is not Jewish. So rather than deal with all of these things and never, establish a state, they decided to leave it and create what they call basic laws. So they have basic laws that govern more or less, the nature of the state. But Israel, another aspect of that is that Israel is all one voting district. There are no voting districts. So the members of the Knesset, the elected representatives, are not committed, they're not responsible, and they have no connection to the constituents. Every elections, the party representatives come, convince people to vote for the party decides who become the members of the Knesset, of the parliament, and that's it. So there's never any direct responsibility by the elected officials to their constituents. And that's again done by design because they want to make sure to disempower certain parts of the population who vote. And that's the perfect way to do it. So I'll say one more thing moving forward. As we envision a free democratic Palestine that will hopefully replace the apartheid regime of Israel, one of the first things that has to happen is creating a constitution and then creating voting districts so that you have a real democracy.
There is a role for the Supreme Court in Israel, right? And this role is influenced by the lack of having a constitution, right? I think that was also one of the items that you had massive demonstrations for not so long ago in Israel, right?
Well, because it's a parliamentary system, there's no real separation of the legislative and the executive branches. The two are tied in. But there was a separation, or there is separation between those two and the judiciary is almost independent. And there are committees that are pretty much democratically created in order to select judges. Now, again, when I say democratically, I mean within the privileged Israeli population. It doesn't include the Palestinians, but within that bubble of the Israeli existence within the apartheid regime, there is some democracy for the Israeli Jews. So this particular government wants to do away with the separation of the independence of the judiciary, and they want it to be more politicized, more reliant on the state, because they don't like the fact that the judiciary has the right to strike down laws and oversee the executive and the legislative branches. So this is one of the reasons the Israelis are protesting.
So, in a nutshell, more power for the politicians, right?
Yes, more powerful politicians, more ability for corrupt and politicians like Netanyahu, who's actually been indicted. The prime minister has been indicted. And so that gives more power to him. And it also allows other politicians who actually served time in jail and for corruption and so on to continue to run and serve in important state positions.
How serious?
Government positions.
How serious are actually those allegations against Netanyahu?
Well, that depends what you mean by serious. I mean, Netanyahu should be indicted for war crimes and genocide. Instead, he was indicted for receiving favors from having all kinds of, receiving favors, receiving cigars and champagne bottles and influencing the big some of the newspaper corporations and media corporations, which in the big scheme of things is corruption, of course, but if you compare it to other governments and corruption around the world, we're talking about the value of maybe a few $100,000 and then some political influence, that goes with his connections to the media. Nobody takes it seriously. Obviously, he's prime minister. He has a majority. The Israeli press rarely even mentions the trial, the investigations, and the fact that he's indicted. And when he comes to speak in America, for example, and he's heralded in America, he's adored here by the media. Nobody, not even once that I heard in any of the major interviews that he gave, challenged him on the fact that he was indicted.
I think there's at least one incident where the president, Barack Obama, then did not appreciate his comments, right?
Well, yes. I mean, there was a big rift between Barack Obama as president and the Congress, and the Congress invited Netanyahu to speak. And in fact, the current Speaker of the House, McCarthy, just visited Tel Aviv, and he promised that if Joe Biden does not invite Netanyahu for a formal visit soon, then he will repeat that and have Congress invite him. So that we might be seeing a repetition of that.
Okay, sounds interesting. Now,
it all goes back. I'm sorry, it just all goes back to this incestuous relationship that exists between the State of Israel and the United States. And so, just in the last few weeks, you had a major congressional delegation. You had the Speaker of the House, and you had a congressional contender for the presidency, DeSantis, who's a governor of Florida. All visit the State of Israel. All visit Netanyahu. All praise Netanyahu and praise the State of Israel. It's as we all know. At the same time, a year ago, Amnesty International came out with a report accusing Israel of committing the crime of being fully engaged since its inception in the crime of apartheid. So there's something very, very disturbing about this relationship and the fact that this can continue even as these horrendous crimes by Israel continue.
I think by any measures, it's clear for any, let's say, objective observer that the US is not neutral in this conflict, right?
No, of course not. Of course not.
I have a question that just popped into my mind because we talk about consequences for leaders. Ariel Sharon and the Sabra and Shatila massacres. I know he had to step down, right, initially, but he came back to power afterwards. Were there ever any serious consequences for him, except this stepping down at the time?
No, and in fact, politically, it was the best thing that ever happened to him because the Ministry of Defense is, of course, very prestigious, but the consequences for his being found responsible was that he cannot serve as Minister of Defense. But that did not preclude him from serving in other ministerial, as minister of other portfolios. And what happened was he was charged with agriculture and housing, which directly affect the lives of Palestinians on a daily basis, on an infrastructure basis, on a very structural basis. And he put in place policies that still exist to this day that vastly discriminate Palestinians, that vastly allows the state to take land and deny water to Palestinians and deny housing and so on. Then when he came back as prime minister, he had all this wealth of accomplishments as a minister in other areas. And I'm sure you may remember, he won in a landslide. It was a heroic return. It was, Caesar coming back to Rome. It was incredible.
I read extensively about that conflict, Lebanon. But in a nutshell, if you can encompass it, Sabra and Shatila, can you explain what happened?
Well, it was a pretty convoluted operation, but the bottom line was that Israel wanted to control Lebanon for a very long time before this even happened, and make sure that there was a government in place that was favorable to Israel. And fighting was going on for a very long time between Israel and the Palestinian forces within Lebanon. There was agreement by which the Palestinian leadership was exiled from Lebanon. But there was a promise and a guarantee by the Americans that the refugee camps, which were now powerless and had no defenses, would be protected. Well, as soon as the Palestinian leadership and the militia were exiled, Israel colluded with the right-wing Christian militia, the Phalange, yes. Israel blocked the refugee camps of Sabra and Shatila, provided other forms of logistics, and allowed the Phalanges to go in and massacre. And all the while, Israeli soldiers were watching this, and there are testimonies by Israeli soldiers and junior officers saying something is going on. And as they went up to the senior officers says, well, Arabs are killing Arabs. It's not our problem. Ariel Sharon said, of course, let them do what they want to do. And this massive massacre was taking place under the watchful eye of the state of Israel, of the Israeli military, and so on. And so that's in a nutshell what
How many people died?
Well, I think the numbers are not absolutely clear, but in the thousands for sure. In the thousands, people were hacked to death. The scenes were horrifying, and the memories. And then there are testimonies of junior Israeli officers who are watching, and they saw trucks of dirt coming from what I believe was a soccer field, and then trucks with bodies going to the soccer field, and again trucks with dirt going back and forth, and so there are mass graves, that were created at the time. It was an atrocity beyond belief. I mean, the fact that Ariel Sharon and one other general, he was a colonel, I think. He was also found responsible, and he was very shortly after that promoted to general. I remember this because I was in the military at the time, so I was following this very closely. And very shortly after the same colonel who was reprimanded and even was fired from his position was later on promoted in another area in the military and promoted to a full general without any problem.
And the irony is, while Israel succeeded in getting the PLO out, the vacuum then was filled up by Hamas, which is Hezbollah. Yeah, absolutely.
Hezbollah.
Yeah.
Yes, and Hezbollah, and the reason is the Israelis were thrown out of southern Lebanon eventually is because of Hezbollah. Hezbollah were able to throw them out, and that's what happened. Israel literally ran out the Israeli military with their tail between their legs.
Yeah.
With no agreement, with nothing. They just ran.
Now, coming back to my items here, so we briefly discussed the constitution, or the missing constitution, and with your kind permission, I would like to discuss a little bit the new government. Yeah, I have 3 or 4 names on my list here, but you may want to add other names. But I have also the coalition agreement from Netanyahu with his new partners in front of me. And if you allow me, I will read this 1 or 2 sentences. It states, "The Jewish people have an exclusive right over all areas of the land of Israel. The government will promote and develop settlements in all parts of the land of Israel, in the Galilee, in Negev, in Golan and Judea and Samaria," which is the occupied West Bank. So I think there is no ambiguity here what the new government actually tries to achieve, right?
Well, there's never been any question that this was the policy of the state of Israel from the very beginning. I mean, this is really no different, other than it states it in the coalition agreement. But in fact, that's exactly what's been happening since 1948. Israel was expanding and building settlements for Jews only on Palestinian land. There were some areas that were less advantageous, so people, required a little more effort in order to settle, like the Nakab in the south and the Galilee, and these are areas that are heavily populated still by Palestinians. The West Bank, this particular coalition wanted to emphasize that what they call Judea and Samaria, which is the West Bank, in order to really push, because they know there's some political pressure from the outside on Israel not to settle, but they've been settling the West Bank. I mean, there are major cities and highways in the West Bank for Jews only. So this is, I think it's more for their constituents to say, look, we are really serious. We actually put it in the agreement. And 2 of the most rabid racist thugs in the cabinet hold positions that specifically deal with the lives of Palestinians in everywhere really, but one of them, Bezalel Smotrich, is in charge of the civil administration, which governs the day-to-day life of Palestinians in the West Bank, in what used to be the West Bank. And you have a minister who is in charge, particularly of the development of, as they call it, the Galilee and the Negev, which this is a code word for expansion of settlements, expulsion of Palestinians, and expropriating Palestinian land. That's code word. Developing when Israel says we need to develop it usually talks about areas that are heavily populated by Palestinians, and we need to Judaize them.
You didn't mention the last name. You mentioned Smotrich, but you didn't say who is the last name.
Smotrich is his last name, Bezalel Smotrich.
Okay.
His full name is Bezalel
So I have him on my list. So maybe we can go through one by one, yeah? In regards to their personal history, because some of those personalities are quite controversial, even in Israel right now. So what's Smotrich's history before he came into the government? What makes him so controversial?
Well, in 2005, he was caught with several hundred liters of gasoline, intending to blow up a major Israeli highway, in opposition to Ariel Sharon's what was called a disengagement from Gaza, and taking out of the settlers from there. He has been a very outspoken leader within the most extreme, racist, violent parts of Israeli society. He co-founded an NGO called Regavim, which pushes the agenda, by saying that the Arabs are taking our land, the Arabs are taking our water, the Arabs are building illegally, the Arabs are ungovernable. And this is particularly in Area C within the West Bank and the Nakab and the Jordan River Valley areas where, again, there's more of a Palestinian population. And these are these are areas that the settlers want to take and fill very quickly. So they've been involved in some of the most racist and very successful, actually, PR. They present themselves. They have a website as these wonderful patriotic people. They are the worst kind of racist thugs. They have their own militia and so forth. So he's been involved with that, and now he's been a member of the Knesset for some time. He was a cabinet member for over several governments in the past, and now he's the Minister of Finance. I don't know what qualifies it to be Minister of Finance. I don't even know if he went to college. He's a graduate of some of the most racist religious Zionist education institutions. And he's also a minister. Within the Ministry of Defense, they created a position for him as the minister in charge of the civil administration. And he's been wanting to he's been pushing for the full annexation of all of the West Bank and the creation of really the formalizing of the reality where the Palestinians live with no rights under full Israeli control. So it's no longer a kind of a military, it's a civilian, it's a kind of a more civilian apartheid, I suppose. He's also been calling for Israel to go back into Gaza and to reoccupy, quote unquote, the Gaza Strip. And that way they can take care of, as he says, as they say, take care of the resistance from the Gaza Strip. Which I think anybody who has any knowledge of military knows would be suicidal for Israel. There's a reason why Israel does not put even one boot of a soldier into the Gaza Strip. The fighters in Gaza are far superior to the Israelis, and the Israeli military has been punished severely for putting boots on the ground in Gaza. So that's who he is. I mean, he's a racist thug, proud of it, speaks very openly about his racism and his political ambitions.
Before we move to the other two names that I have on my list here, you said it would be suicidal for Israel to go into Gaza. That surprises me. Yeah.
Militarily, they will be wiped out. How is that possible? Because the Gazan fighters are far more superior to the Israeli fighters. Israeli soldiers have never faced resistance other than children with rocks, or maybe a few young men with an automatic rifle. They've never faced any real serious military opposition. And when they did enter Gaza the last time with boots on the ground in 2014, the casualties were very, very heavy, including very senior officers. And that's why since 2014 we have not seen Israeli boots on the ground in Gaza. And so, and Gaza is it's well known. I mean, Gaza is now, there's a network of tunnels and a network of military that will not allow, and again, like I said, will not allow Israeli boots to come in. And if they did, they will be punished severely. I mean, Israel has more firepower, Israel has better logistics, and Israel has warplanes. That's the advantage. But if Israeli soldiers have to face a well-organized, motivated military force, even, granted it's, in Gaza it's not really a military, it's not really a full military, it's more like a militia, and rather small, but still they would be punished heavily. Okay. There's no question.
I mean, I was aware that last time around was difficult for Israel in Gaza, yeah? I wasn't...
It was suicide. That they pulled out very quickly. They pulled the ground forces out very quickly because they were punished so heavily.
Okay. Let's go to another name on my list, Ben-Gvir. He's the Minister of National Security, right?
Yeah, Itamar Ben-Gvir is really the main force within this movement, within this new this settler movement that is now running the table. He lives near Hebron, which is one of the racist settlements. The settlements around the city of Hebron are some of probably the most racist, or of the most racist. He's been a thug his whole life. He is a direct disciple of Meir Kahana, who was the guru of the most racist, violent of the entire Zionist political spectrum. And he was a direct disciple of his. Every year he goes and speaks at a memorial in his commemorating the death of Kahana and so on. Kahanaism became a thing in Israeli society, in Israeli politics, because he called for the expulsion or the killing of Palestinians, and all sorts of terribly racist rhetoric. And he said very openly that the massacre in the Ibrahimi Mosque in 1994, the lunatic that went in and massacred worshippers in 1984 during Ramadan, was a hero, and he idolizes him, and he demanded this particular position, which was created specifically for him. There was never a national security ministry, so he created it, and he's in charge, among many things, of the police, the prisons, all the law enforcement agencies, and there's some very specific ones that deal with Palestinians, and the militarized police unit, which is called the border police, but it's a misnomer. It has nothing to do with the border, who deal with Palestinians everywhere, but he is also in charge of their work in the West Bank, which is not the way things used to be. All military in the West Bank, even that unit, were always commanded by the military. Now they're commanded by him, and they have just created a new militia. It's called the Ben Gvir Army, or the Ben Gvir Militia, which imposes just horrific terror. I mean, it terrorizes Palestinians throughout the country, everywhere. They've got jeeps, they've got military uniforms, they've got weapons, which they've always had. But now they have a minister who's actually creating policy, who is pushing for this horrendous terrorizing of Palestinians everywhere in an attempt to rid the country, particularly an area like the Nakab and the Jordan River Valley, of Palestinians, of Palestinian presence. And of course, he is one of the leaders of the push to destroy Al-Aqsa and build some kind of a temple instead.
If I understand it correctly, for the right-wing part of his government to agree to the postponement of those reforms that Netanyahu would push through, he had to agree for this new militia.
He had to agree to the militia and to the last assault that we saw in Gaza and the West Bank. That was the condition. And, this is typical of Israeli politics, and particularly of somebody like Ben Gvir, who he knows he's going to get everything he wants because the prime minister, basically the entire cabinet, agrees with him ideologically. So he wanted to show his constituents that he can get things done. And he wanted a major sweep in the West Bank and a major assault on Gaza. And that's what we saw. I mean, the only reason there was these people were murdered, these children that were killed over the last few weeks, was to satisfy his desires to see Palestinian bloodshed, nothing else.
The last name on my list, if you have other names, is that Justice Minister Yariv Levin.
Well, look, the list we could talk for days about the members of this coalition, because each and every one of them has a history of racist rhetoric, and if they were in charge, if they were part of any government in the past, then of course many of them were in sub-cabinet positions. Many of them were in leadership positions in the parliament, so in parliamentary important committees and so on. So they have a record of racism and racist speech that goes back to the very beginning. That's why they're in power. That's how they get elected. And I like to remind people like to say sometimes, well, it's not the people, it's the government. No, these people were voted in, this government, these politicians were voted in a democratically elected process, which Israeli citizens, Israeli Jews enjoy. So we can't put this on. We can't exonerate the people because they chose these people. And Yariv Levin, he's the leader in many ways of the so-called judicial reform, and he wants to see the complete elimination of the separation and the independence of the judiciary. And again, it's not just that. There's a whole list of items on that agenda. But it's and he sells it quite well. He says, well, no, it's very democratic. It's not true. It's this, it's that, it's the other. But, in speaking to Israeli politicians, the very few Israeli politicians who are on the more radical left, which is funny to say because these are just people who support democracy and justice. There's nothing radical about them, like Ofer Kasif and others who are standing very, very firmly against this. It's a march to full fascism that even privileged Israeli citizens will be subjected to. So he's the architect and the leader of this so-called reform.
And then, and this is a segue into another topic, and then this government has I don't want to say new tool because it's only the latest iteration of the new tool. It started in 2000, right? I'm referring to what Amnesty International in their report from March this year called Automated Apartheid. Yeah. I have the report in front of me. I read almost all of it today. Me working in IT, I can talk a little bit about these kind of things. Yeah. But as an introduction, what do you know about it?
Well, probably the most, I know Palestinians who are subjected to this. We're talking about artificial intelligence. We're talking about technology that identifies Palestinians. We're talking about technology that allows for the killing of Palestinians using IT. And so in Hebron, for example, there is already, and we discussed Isa Amro, are already in place machine guns at checkpoints that are being operated by artificial intelligence. And so, this is kind of a lab. They're using the Palestinians as animals in a lab, really, to see how it works. Worst things will happen; they'll kill the wrong Palestinian. I mean, who cares? But that's already in place at checkpoints in Hebron, and and today the soldiers have technology on their phones where they know exactly where particular people are. As soon as people think of going somewhere. And Isa Amro is, by the way, one of these people. As soon as they meet him, they have the phone, they know it's him, they know where he's going. They have this whole... So it's a new iteration of... It's a more advanced iteration of the apartheid. It's just, why use soldiers if you can use artificial intelligence? That's kind of the rationale. Really what I believe is it's an attempt by an industry to show that it's been battle proven so that they can sell it elsewhere, which is what they do with the, some of the other weapon systems that they use in Gaza and so forth.
I think there are multiple components to that. So, of course, on the forefront, you have those high resolution cameras, which you can, recognize faces on I don't know how much distance. But what's more important, of course, is in the background, not only the artificial intelligence as the algorithm, but also the data bank. And I think I saw in a description here, Hebron as the smart city system to locate unusual events in the city of Hebron and ultimately manipulate them from end to end, also them, the Palestinians. Now, one item that I have not seen in the report from Amnesty International is something that I'm familiar with. You can use this data already since 2004 to produce incredibly accurate behavioral predictions. And you don't even need specialized data for it. You can already use publicly available data. So all these components combined are a very powerful tool. And we have not even discussed the psychological impact this has on people who cannot do anything anymore. Yeah, they are 24/7 outside, inside, exactly what you said, where they go, any kind of movements, everybody they meet. People don't realize the phones are a massive contributor, which is actually, I read, to my surprise, I read that the Israeli army actually hands out phones to the population and threaten them. They have to use it. Right? So the phones and the intelligence community, but also the IT community from Israel are very strong. So I actually had a look into how come that we have so many large and very sophisticated high-tech companies related to security and surveillance coming from Israel. And what I found was that whilst our soldiers have this occupation in the army. When they move out of the army, they go into business and they open businesses with it. Yeah. So, I mean, Pegasus, for example, all this kind of highly specialized and I don't want to say invisible, because if you really want, you can find it. Yeah. But you don't need to click on the link anymore. You can be targeted without any, let's say, wrongdoing on the user's end. And it's much more than just recording phone or microphone or camera. Yeah? iPhones flashing every 15 seconds, infrared, yeah, to monitor your all these kind of things. So that's another element which will make it very, very difficult for the ordinary people on the street. And I think the impact is not yet really. I mean, I'm talking about global impact, because I have no illusion here. This will not be contained to neither Palestine nor Israel.
No.
We all in the West, we point towards China. Oh, look, in China, everywhere cameras. Walk in London. Do yourself a favor. Walk in London. What do you think? So this will definitely spread like wildfire.
Yeah, I think when they, you remember after the fall of the Berlin Wall, people went into the archives of the Stasi and they found all these horrific things, and the Soviet Union and the KGB. What they're going to find in the files when apartheid falls in Palestine will be, I think, more shocking than anything we've seen, because it has to do with what you just described. And the truth is, Hebron, and again, there's two parts to Hebron, just to be clear. There's the large main city of Hebron, which Israel has no interest in. It's the largest city in the West Bank. It's wealthy. It's full of businesses. It's a very, very important city. And then you have, which is referred to as H1, and then you have the old city, or H2, which is mostly the old city, and surrounding areas the settlers want. So in that part of so Hebron has 250,000 people. The old city has only about 20,000 people, with 800 settlers, and enormous military force, and surveillance equipment, and the Israeli secret police is everywhere. So already Palestinians there can't move. You cannot walk anywhere, and I've been there 1,000 times. You can't walk from any one spot to another one spot without crossing a checkpoint. You can't. It doesn't exist. Or having some kind of movement barrier that prohibits you from going through. You have to take some kind of a roundabout way. There is no way you will go anywhere within that part of the city without encountering a checkpoint, soldiers, and settlers. Impossible. So Palestinian life is already like this. Now they're adding this, not because it's needed, of course, but like you said, because it helps them market this. And I was listening to an interview by some military expert who was saying how, in other countries, if somebody's very smart, they get a great education, they'll start a business, they'll develop some kind of a technology for whatever, civilian use. Israelis focus on this, on military use, on better missiles, better warplanes, this kind of abusive technology and intrusive technology. And they become millionaires because everybody loves, all these, every country, like I said, not only China, but London, they all want this, they all just craving this kind of intrusive technology. And again, I think when this thing collapses, what people will find, the things that we don't know yet, because what we know is horrific enough, but when we find the things that we don't know, they'll be shocked, even more than we were ever shocked with the fall of any other oppressive regime.
You say when it collapses. Interesting thought. How realistic you think is the thought of what we call Israeli apartheid to fall within the next, 10, 20 years?
Well, I don't think it's, who knows what realistic is, but I think it is perfectly realistic to expect that no matter how technologically and militarily and they're advanced and how well their intelligence services are, a state where the minority population is completely privileged and the majority population are so underprivileged and oppressed to this degree, where you have over 2 million people, half an hour drive from Tel Aviv, which is this fun Mediterranean city with beaches and drinking and bars, and it's a wonder, really the funnest place on earth kind of thing. And you can see the smoke from Tel Aviv beaches when they bomb Gaza. And you have 2 million people living without proper, clean drinking water. This is not sustainable. Then you've got 3.5 million people living in ghettos in the West Bank, and you've got another 2 million, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in Nakab without access to water. The poverty is horrific in the Palestinian community. I don't think this is sustainable. And we're talking about, a place that is so highly visible. So, and there is resistance, and there is growing recognition that this is wrong. Now, if we do nothing as activists, it could take 20 years. I think if we act, smart, and if we are better organized and we mobilize, and people of conscience around the world really act up on this, then I think it's realistic that it will fall even sooner. But there's no question in my mind that this evil regime is going to collapse, just like other regimes collapsed. I mean, I think it's inevitable. I mean, regimes collapse and come up, but I think this particular regime is so destructive that it's not sustainable, even if there was no real, activist opposition around the world. And again, I speak in Europe a lot. I see, I don't know how many, halls are always filled with people. And there's a sense that people on the ground do not accept the apartheid state of Israel. And there's a growing sense of this happening now in America too. But this opposition to the apartheid and the support of Palestine and Palestinian rights and justice has not reached the politicians, and it's not reached the corporate media. And that's the gap that we need to worry about. That's the gap that we need to work on, to push it so that politicians realize, and I think we talked about this before, a politician who associates with Zionism should know that their political life is going to be over. Just like, for the most part, politicians who express anti-Semitic sentiments, except for some exceptions, for the most part, they will not be elected. That'll be the end of their political career. And so this is what we need to do. But I have no doubt that this regime is going to collapse. No doubt whatsoever.
You mentioned the mainstream media, right? Now, for me, mainstream media and government are merging more and more. And a really good example is now the last leaks from this 20-year-old young gentleman who, and where all the mainstream media agreed with the government not to publish what was actually leaked. And if I understood this correctly, actually it was even so that I think the media even traced this person down. So it was not the American government or FBI. No. It was the media, and then handed over the information, right? So instead of holding truth to power and informing the public, it's one entity. It becomes more and more one entity.
Yeah. It's a very serious problem. There really is no independent media other than the alternative media today. And I think at the end it's going to backfire, because it makes the mainstream media is no longer reliable. It's not something that's not reliable. So people are not going to not going to use it, not going to utilize it, and so it's I think at the end it's going to that too is inevitably going to collapse, because if I don't think it's sustainable either. But I'm an optimist, so I think things at the end will inevitably will inevitably be improved.
Okay, one last question. It's actually for you. Is there anything that you would, what's close to your heart, what we have not discussed in the last call and in this call, something that you would like to highlight?
Yes, I think people need to realize that if we want to see justice in Palestine, we all have to act. It's not going to come from outside. It's not going to come from another power, from another prime minister. It's, governments change direction when we impose that on them. We the voters, we the consumers of the media have to act, have to mobilize. I think, like civil rights, apartheid in South Africa, and so on, there's certain issues that we're all judged upon by the next generations. Our kids, our grandkids are going to ask us, what did you do? What did you say? How did you resist this? Where did you stand when this was going on? So we're going to be judged by our children, by our grandchildren. And I think it's crucial that we all stand on the side of justice, that we do everything we can to bring about a free, democratic Palestine and all of historic Palestine. And that means the dismantlement of the apartheid regime and replacing it with a real democratic state. And it's not something that's impossible to do. We have a state that is perfectly functional, except that there's an apartheid regime that needs to be taken away. So I don't think that's asking too much, and I think again it's up to each individual, every person of conscience in Europe, in Indonesia, in everywhere around the world, in Africa, need to stand up against this state of Israel. We have to demand sanctions. We have to demand boycotts.
Miko Peled, I hope your words will be heard. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure, my friend.